My name is Nancy, and I'm a storyteller. The first story I have to tell you this evening is about a haunted hospital here in Gettysburg. From the earliest hours of the battle, wounded soldiers were being brought into the private homes of the citizens here. Men were unceremoniously dumped on the front porches of these houses. Some men limped their way into the parlors, into the backyards, and into the cellars of the civilians here in town. If you can, imagine what it was like to live here during that time. Many of these homes were the very first hospitals and morgues. The story that I'd like to share with you is about one of those homes. A friend of mine told me this story, and I believe it absolutely, positively to be true, for she holds a very important job in a law enforcement agency here in town, and she doesn't suffer fools gladly. And it is for that reason I'm sure it happened. You see, one evening, my girlfriend and her husband were visiting her in-laws. They went to the house, they had dinner, and they had 2 young sons. It got too late. They decided not to go home and to spend the night. When it was time for bed, they took the youngest of their 2 sons and they deposited him in a bedroom just at the top of the stairs. With their older son, they placed him in a large middle room in the house, and they themselves slept in the far bedroom, which could only be reached by walking through the central room. Lights went out, everybody in the house went to sleep. And about 1 or 2 in the morning, my girlfriend said she was awoken by the sound of heavy footfalls walking up the stairs. At first, of course, she thought she was just imagining it, or perhaps had heard them in a dream. But when she came full awake, she heard the steps walking through the room. Now, immediately, she began to try and wake her husband up, but he just couldn't be awoken. She pushed, she pulled at him. No matter how much she begged, he wouldn't wake up. And still, she heard the footsteps approaching closer and closer. It seemed that her heart beat in rhythm with the heavy footfalls, and she was positively terrified until she realized there was no way the footsteps could be coming this close to her room without having passed by the room of her sons before. Heavier and heavier, closer and closer the steps came, until finally they stopped, and she felt a small measure of relief, until they began walking once again, only this time right into the room where she was sleeping. Well, she told me by that time she was all the way down into the center of her bed, all the covers up over her head. She quit trying to wake up her husband. That was just not going to happen. And as the boots stepped closer and closer to her bed, unbelievably, she felt the weight of a body press down upon her mattress. And just when she thought she couldn't stand the fright of it any longer, she said an amazing calm just washed over her. And all of a sudden, she felt very at peace and very definitely unafraid. And for what might have lasted 15 or 20 seconds, the weight lifted up from her bed, and she heard the boots walk out of her room. Then she was about brave enough to pull the covers down from her head, and when she did so, she glimpsed the figure of a very large man standing in her doorway and walking right by. And then she heard the boots continue through the middle room. At the top of the stairs, she heard them walk halfway down and disappear into the night. She managed to go to sleep, but in the morning, when she awoke, she went downstairs to find her mother-in-law sitting at the kitchen table. She said to her mother-in-law, "What was Dad doing walking around the house all last night?" Her mother-in-law simply looked at her. "That wasn't your father," she said. But Tina said, "I know, I heard the footsteps." "Oh, I heard them too," her mother-in-law assured her. "But those weren't the footsteps of your father, for he lay in bed right next to me, and I heard them as well." Tina said, "Well then, what was it? It doesn't make any sense. You heard it, I heard it, but no one was here." Her mother-in-law then let her in on a little family secret. You see, they lived in a haunted house. Tina said she couldn't believe it. No, why, her husband had never told her anything about their home being haunted, and he grew up there. But he stood in the corner of the kitchen and nodded in agreement.